welcome to the Quilt Addicts Anonymous July mini block of the month. I can't believe we're almost done with this quilt. I'm used to doing big block of the months that last the whole year, so to be in the second month and to be 3/4 of the way done with our blocks is crazy to me. So if you're following along or if you haven't started yet, it's really easy to catch up. So go to quiltaddictsanonymous.com and click on the mini block of the month 2016. It's underneath the block of the month drop down in the menu, and you can get the patterns and fabric cutting instructions that have been released to date. We've done one block in June and then we're doing July today, and there also are kits available. So if you really love this fabric, we're going to be finished up in August, so you'll have plenty of time to get this quilted and enjoyed in fall, and the beautiful rust and cream and brown colors are really perfect for that. So this block isn't really difficult, but there are a lot of different units that are going to be pieced for it, so the video might be a little longer than you're used to, but don't be intimidated. It's all pretty simple piecing and nothing we haven't done before if you've been following along with my other block of the months. So let's get started. So first I'm going to just do the 4 patch that's in the center. And I have it laid out here in the way that it is supposed to be for the layout diagram. Make sure you go to quiltaddictsanonymous.com to get your free printable instructions for that. So I'm just going to lay those right sides together. So I'm going to go ahead and bring that over to the sewing machine and sew that together with a scant 1/4 inch, or just with a regular 1/4 inch stitch for this one. And I'm going to chain piece this because it's just one little bit and it'll go together really quickly that way. So to do that, you just kind of line everything up for your next piece, and then I lift up my presser foot and I just slide the next one in without breaking thread and just sew that through. And when you're done, you have 2 together and you just snip the little thread in between, and we're ready to go on the next step. So I've got my blocks pieced, and I'm just going to put them so the same side of the fabric is up, and that'll help us get some nice interlocking seams when we go to put this 9 patch together. Just press these guys open, iron out of the way. Now these seams are both going toward this brownish rust fabric that has more of a print. So when I flip these around like that, my seams are going in opposite directions, which makes it really easy to just snug those up against each other and sew for the next step. Now you could pin if you wanted. You could put a pin right in here to hold those together. I'm not going to because I've just done this enough to where I don't need to do it. Alright, so I've got my seams nice and snugged up next to each other. Again, you could pin if you want to. I'm not going to in this case. I've done this a lot of times. If you're a beginner, you definitely would probably want to pin. But I'm just kind of holding those seams in place. And then when the needle is in the seam allowance, I just sort of arrange this back end here and sew again. Alright, now we're back over at our pressing surface, and we're just going to give that a quick little press open, and our center unit is already done. We've got our nice 4 patch ready to go. Now we have to do our corner units, and it's not quite a 4 patch, but it's close and it's just as easy to put together. So I've got it laid out, and again, for your layout instructions and your cutting instructions, make sure you go to quiltaddictsanonymous.com and print out your free printable instructions there. So I just laid those right sides together. Gonna arrange those on the sewing machine. Make sure I have my corners good and together there. I'm just gonna sew that right sides together. And this is a great block to chain piece. We're making 4 of them, and so you could just stack up everything for all 4 of these blocks. So we would be doing 8 of these all in one row. I'm just doing the ones we need for the one block for the tutorial. That helps with time. So again, I've chain pieced these together. All I have to do is take a little scissor, clip those apart, and now they're ready to press. So in this case, I definitely want to press so that the seam is underneath this rust fabric. I just love this fabric. It's also the border fabric because I just fell in love with it and I had to have as much of it in the quilt as possible. And that will keep it from having a shadow when we put the rest of the block together, because that seam is underneath the darker fabric, so you won't see it when we put it together. So I'm going to bring over my rectangle, which is now the same size as our piece above it. And again, I can just lay those right sides together and chain piece this baby together. This is another instance where you really don't have to pin. If you are new or you really feel comfortable with pins, go ahead and do it. Do whatever you're comfortable with, but you definitely have my permission to skip the pins. So far anyway on this quilt block. This is another, great block to chain piece. You can do all 8 of these if you want together and save some time. I mean, I'm pretty much making this in real time as I'm shooting this video, and you can see that it's going really fast. Now, normally when I would press something like this, I would press the seam so that it's underneath this long seam. But in this case, I really don't want to have that shadow. So I'm going to press it. So even though there's a little bit more resistance with this seam here, since it's pieced, we won't have a shadow from this block here. So that's going to make life easier for us. And it also will fit up next to the one that's next to it, which we're going to make next a little better because we're going to press that one so that the seam is going down. Alright, so now we're going to move on to some flying geese. This is probably the most challenging block or unit in the block, but once you do it, it really gets pretty easy. I think it's a lot easier and more accurate than the stitch and flip method of flying geese. So I just drew a line from point to point on the wrong side of that triangle, or the square, rather. I'm going to do it again because we're going to need 2 of them for this first part. And now I'm going to take that and I'm going to lay it right sides together so that it matches the points on the big square here. And I'm going to stitch a scant 1/4 inch stitch along either side of these lines. Now if you want, you can pin these in place so that way you know that they're going to stay. I don't. I've done like hundreds of these at a time, and if I were to pin everyone, it would just not be a time saver. So I'm not going to pin, but you are more than welcome to just stick a little pin right in here and right in here if that makes you feel more comfortable. So now I'm moving my sewing machine over to a scant 1/4 inch stitch. So on my machine, that means I just move my needle width 1 to the right. If you don't have that option on your machine, you can sew right on top with your presser foot right on top of that drawn line, like the edge of it, instead of right next to, which is what I'm going to do. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to set my presser foot up so that it's right next to that line that I drew, and just start sewing down both sides of that drawn line. I kind of slow down a little bit when I get to the middle. I make sure that my corners are still good and lined up, and that my lines are pretty much in line in the center. So when you get to the end, you're just going to go ahead and cut your thread, flip it around, and go down the other side. So now we're back at the cutting board, and I'm going to go ahead and cut this apart right on that line that we drew. And at this point, accuracy isn't super important because we've already sewn in the accuracy when we, missed a little bit there, when we stitch on either side of that line, but you don't want your seam to get too skinny because then it can pop open on the long arm. So do be careful, although it isn't super important that you're exactly on that line. So I'm going to move that out of the way, and if you've done this right, when we press it open right now, it's going to kind of look a little bit like a heart. And if this is your first time making flying geese this way, I know this looks weird, and like it probably isn't going to work out. But just wait, stay with me. It's going to look perfect as soon as we get through the next step here. Alright, so I've got both of those ready to go and off to the side here. So now I need 2 more of these. And I need to draw lines on the wrong side of that. If you're using batiks, there is no wrong side. So if you purchase this kit with these beautiful fabrics, you don't have to worry about that. So that's one less thing to worry about. Alright, so I'm just lining up my ruler from point to point here. And drawing with my nice little chalk marking tool, which shows really great on this. So now what you're going to do is you're just going to arrange this so that the point is right in the point of your heart on that big triangle. And again, there's full instructions and layout diagrams that you can reference and have printed out next to your sewing machine when you're doing this as well. So now I'm going to sew down either side of this drawn line, and that's what's going to give us our flying geese unit. So this is another great example of if you need to and you feel more comfortable, you certainly can pin this little square in place, but it's not necessary. So if you are chain piecing a whole bunch of these, like I said, I've done like hundreds at a time, then you can skip that step and be a little bit more efficient. Alright, now we're back to the cutting mat, and I'm just going to zoom in just a little here. Now, if you've done this right, your stitching line is going to come out right in this little valley where the little triangle meets like the corner of this guy. And that means that your scant 1/4 inch stitch is right on, and that is going to turn out great in the next step. So now I'm going to cut this apart on that drawn line again. Just like before, it's not super important that you're exactly on that line, but you don't want to be too close to any one of these seams because then it could pop open on you when this goes on the long arm, and that would just be awful. So I'm going to go ahead and move that, and we're going to press these guys open, and then you're going to see the flying geese. So there we go. Now we got 2 flying geese, and we have one more step before these are totally done and ready to put into the rest of our unit. And if you've done it right, you really are probably just going to be getting rid of dog ears. But, you know, even I am off a little bit in some points, like I am just a tad bit in this one. So what I'm going to do is square this up to 2.5 inches by 4.5 inches. And I'm looking for a couple things here. So my 2 1/4 should be right at the center where this dot is. So that should be right above it. And then my 1/4 inch line should be right where that big triangle ends. And it is in this case. And then I want to get my 4.5 inch line as close to the edge of where these triangles come together as possible. It is on this side, it isn't on this one, but that's okay. I'm going to just kind of fudge that a little bit when I get to the next step, and I'll show you how I do that. So I'm just going to go ahead and trim. And I'm not taking out too much. There isn't a whole lot left here, but it really does make a difference when you're piecing them together, and I feel like it makes for a much flatter quilt when you're all done. So now I've got it back in line, and my 45-degree line is right on this triangle this time. Now this line I've cut, so that's right on 4.5 and 2.5 inch marks. And now I can see that since my 45-degree line is coming right on the seam line, this is going to look okay, and my point's going to be where I need it to be. So it's just really important that that 45-degree line, basically that these triangles come together right at the point. And that will make for a flying geese unit that really comes together really well. So go ahead and move that to the side here, and then we're going to add the final piece. So in this case, again, we're just going to do a stitch and flip. It's kind of like when we put our 4-patch units together, just we have a rectangle and a flying geese unit instead. So I'm going to flip those right sides together, and I'm going to zoom in just a little bit here. So it might be a little hard to tell here because I use beige thread, but I'm going to go ahead and mark on this with a erasable pen so you can see it a little clearly. So this is my thread line where this blue mark is, and it makes this little X right here. So when I sew this together, I'm going to want to make sure that my needle is just to the right of where that X is, and that'll make sure that my point ends up where it's supposed to be. Now, in a perfect world, this is going to be right at the 1/4 inch stitch line. It looks like it is in this case, but it isn't always. And in that case, it's more important to either come in a little or come out a little bit in order to make sure that that point is not cut off or too far out. And because that's what people are going to look at. They're going to look at whether your points are there, not whether exactly you're right on or maybe off 1/8 of an inch with your stitch. And that's all it's going to be if you've done this correctly, or even kind of correctly. So you want to make sure that you're just a little bit to the right of where that X is when you're sewing on the next step. So again, I could pin this. I'm not going to. We're all about efficiency today. And I'm just going to make sure that I'm just slowing down when I get to that center, so that I'm just one needle width to the right of where that X is. And that'll make her a perfect point when we go to put this together. Alright, this is our last piece unit. And I'm going to press this one so that the seam is underneath this brown rectangle. It's kind of the path of least resistance, so that makes life a little easier. And as you can see, this point is just perfect. You know, I stitched one width to the right of that X, and my point is just hitting right at a perfect spot. So that's a trick to making sure your flying geese points come out exactly where they're supposed to be, is careful cutting to make sure all your ends are right at the corners, and then stitching right next to that X to get that point right where it's supposed to be. Well, I'm going to finish making these units. I'm going to finish up my flying geese, trimming them up, and then sewing these together, and then we'll come back and put this block together. For a complete layout diagram, make sure to go to quiltaddictsanonymous.com and download the free printable instructions for the July mini block of the month. Now, if you followed my instructions on how to press, then these seams here are going to be going in opposite directions, which will make it really easy to get these seams matched up when you go together. Otherwise, there are no matching seams in the rest of the block except for when we put the units together. So this is going to be pretty simple. So if I just lay this right sides together, and you can see that my seams are going in opposite directions, and I am going to pin this. I know I've avoided it so far, but at this point I do like to make sure that I take a little bit extra step. So this is really the only seam that I'm going to pin when I'm putting my rows together, but I'll just sew all my rows together, and then I'll sew each row to the next one to make my entire block. At this point it's like putting together a 9-patch. So just make sure you pin the seams here and here when you're putting them together, and then of course when you put your rows together, and you'll be good to go. So this is it. This is our July mini block of the month. There's a lot of different units in it, but it really helps make this block interesting, and they're really not that difficult when you break them down. So I hope you've enjoyed making it so far. We have now made 3/4 of the blocks for this quilt. So we just have 4 more to make in August. Then we're going to slap on some borders, and you're going to have a block of the month done and ready to sew up to enjoy this fall. Thanks for following along. If you like this quilt, make sure to go download the free printable instructions at quiltaddictsanonymous.com. Click on the Block of the Month tab, and you'll see a drop down for the mini block of the month, and you'll be able to get links to where you can get the pattern, watch the tutorial, and you can get the kit. There's still a lot left. So if you really like these fabrics, you can definitely make it in this colorway. And they are just gorgeous. They are hand-dyed batiks from Majestic Batiks. They're gorgeous. I use them in all of my kits because I just think they are amazing. Thanks so much for following along, and happy quilting!